All right, street law. So today I'm not going to be able to be in class, so we are going to have to do this the old-fashioned way and obviously take notes as you need and pay attention because this will be important for the class. Obviously, the two major types of courts, civil and criminal, are going to be very important as we go forward. So, our past question, what does UDH star R stand for? If you forgot from last week, go back, look and see what that is, and then come back. And just a quick reminder, our present question, what is a verdict? So think about verdict. If you ever watched a show about court or anything like that, that'll definitely help. But hopefully you can and kind of be familiar with that. It's the decision made by either a judge or a jury. So we're going to be looking at those verdicts and how they are different based on whether they're in criminal or civil cases. Let's go ahead, of course, take some time and say our prayer, and then we'll go from there. All right, once you've said it, we can continue on. So our objectives today. How are criminal and civil courts different and similar? Because of course there are plenty of similarities. And on what people are important to that court process. What kind of people would be in the court if you ever do go to court. Okay, let's go ahead and start off by looking at the criminal courts. This we're going to focus on first. We're going to look at criminal courts, how they are defined. So the purpose of criminal courts, well, it's right there, to regulate public conduct. That's as simple as that. There are laws that have to be enforced, and if you break those laws, you are a criminal. That can be anything from running a red light to tax evasion to anything like that. If there is a law that is broken, then technically it is through criminal court. And the government is the one in charge of running is against you, right? They're the ones who are charging a person with breaking the law, and they take them to court, and they have to prove that you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So it is through the government. There might be a second party, but it would be on the same side as you, not necessarily against you. So nobody's suing you. No one is. You're not having to go against another citizen. You're going against the government itself, and we'll look at how that is played out through a court process. Now, the verdict, what is based on? So essentially, in order to be convicted, the court, the jury or judge has to find you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the limitation, right? So they don't just have to say, "Oh, you're pretty guilty." They have to say, "You are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." And in all the cases that you are innocent until proven guilty. So that's how it's supposed to be used. Punishment. So if you are found guilty beyond reasonable doubt, then you can be fined. So money comes from somewhere. You can be supervised, meaning that you have to, maybe you're on house arrest, that kind of thing. You can be imprisoned in jail or in prison. And you can even be killed in some states and by the federal government. So the punishments can vary widely. There's two major types of criminal cases, misdemeanors or felonies. So if you're a misdemeanor, it's going to be a much smaller crime, usually less than a couple $100s. If it's like stealing something like damages, that kind of stuff. If it's a small, if it's like the first time you're doing something generally, of course, except if it's like major murder or arson or something like that. Felony is going to be for more serious crimes. If you are charged with a crime that's going to have more than a year in prison, that's a felony. So make sure you know the difference between those two, misdemeanor and felony. They're going to come back to play a huge role in this. I would say that most people are going to be dealing with misdemeanors on a regular basis instead of felonies. Felonies are pretty serious. You're going to have to do some major law breaking or some major damage in order to be a felony. Okay. Now, on the other side, if we look at civil cases, okay, this is a very different type of court because the purpose is not dealing with the government at all. It's trying to regulate problems or issues between individuals or groups. So one person or group will sue another person or group for some type of injustice, whatever the case is. Now, sometimes these are the same thing as a crime, and other times they're different from crimes. But it's always between these two individuals. The government generally is not involved on a regular basis. You can technically sue the government, but that's a pretty rare occasion. Okay. So the verdict, instead of based on guilty beyond reasonable doubt, is based on a preponderance of evidence. Okay, that's a fancy way of saying is there's more evidence in favor of one person than the other person, whether it's for either side. And that preponderance evidence, you have to have at least more evidence on your side than the other person. And the punishment, you can't go to jail, you can't be put to death, you can't be put on house arrest. The only thing you can be forced to do is pay for losses and damage, any type of damages. So we'll look at see how that applies and how they decide how much money they are forced to pay up in cases like that. Okay. There's actually 3 different types of civil cases. There is intentional torts, there is negligent torts, and there's strict liability torts. So an intentional tort means that was on purpose. It was causing someone harm on purpose. Typically, these are also crimes. So you can actually be sent to court on 2 different occasions, once by the government and once by this individual. Negligence is when you accidentally do something that causes harm, but you were not being reasonably cautious, and therefore you are held accountable for that harm, and therefore you have to make that harm right. And then finally, the strict liability. These are really dangerous situations and dangerous things that automatically are assumed that if you do it, you are that is your fault. So things like if you are a construction crew, okay, and you hurt someone, you're already in very dangerous work. So if somebody is hurt, it's actually automatically your fault in that situation. So there are certain strict liabilities. It's only under certain situations, though, that are extremely dangerous for one reason or another. Okay, so if you look at these criminal and civil, right, we have a lot of differences. You look at the types of verdicts. You look at the types of punishments. Okay, you look at who's bringing who to court. Okay, but there are some similarities as well that go kind of in the middle there, right? Either one can be used with a judge or a jury. Okay, either one can have some financial repercussions. So they're going to have to pay court costs and that kind of stuff in order to go to court. There's the whole court process is somewhat similar all the way through, whether it's going criminal or civil. So there are some similarities there as well. Not everything is completely different, whether you go criminal or civil. So you kind of have to look at here. And a lot of the people are similar between criminal and civil cases. So let's take a look at those people and see how they apply here. Okay, so first person we're going to look at is the defendants. You're always going to have a defendant, the person who is accused. Whether you're in criminal court or civil court, there will always be a defendant. And that is a person who did the wrong, who did the harm, who did the crime. Okay, if you are in civil court, there is a plaintiff. That's the person or company that was harmed, and therefore brings the case. So the person who is essentially saying, I am suing you. The plaintiff sues the defendant. Okay. Usually, if you're a defendant, and sometimes if you're a plaintiff, you will have an attorney, a lawyer, somebody who is very knowledgeable about this information and is willing to represent that individual. If you are in a criminal case, you will automatically be going against something called a prosecutor. So notice that a prosecutor is in criminal court, a plaintiff is in civil court. A defendant is in both courts, as is attorneys. And attorneys can favor either side of the plaintiff or the defendant. A prosecutor is technically an attorney, but he's specifically for the government. So, all right, so you have all those people. Those are the main individuals who are in court that are coming in and out of. Of course, people who are making the decisions could be one of 2 different types of groups. The judge, Somebody who is presiding over the case can possibly decide the verdict or punishment, keeps things rolling, keeps things kind of orderly and structured, and typically has control over that courtroom. The jury, on the other hand, is a group of people from that community who are chosen to decide the verdict and or punishment. Sometimes they're asked to choose punishment, other times they're not. Technically, these jury members can be overruled by the judge, but that can lead to a whole bunch of problems if that's necessarily if the judge does do that, that can be problematic. So this jury can be used on civil or criminal cases, but they have different requirements for that type of case. So if you are in civil, you may have different verdicts, you may have different situations than if you would get in a criminal case. So the last few people that are going to be important to the court, a bailiff. You might have heard of these, especially if you've ever watched court TV or something like that. You'll see the bailiff, they're providing security, right? The person in the back there who's trying to control violent parties, who will sometimes act as a liaison between the different parties at the bench versus the judge. So they're the security that's in the courtroom itself. You also have a clerk, someone who is responsible for dealing with getting the jury all taken care of, making sure that they handle the import of evidence and that kind of stuff. So if you are a clerk, you're not necessarily in the courtroom very much. You are dealing with all of the extras that are happening in and out of the courtroom as you go in and out of those. And then the last person, and some people think that this is the clerk, but it's actually a different person, and that is the court reporter. So everything that is said in the courtroom is recorded. Why? Because people need to be able to go back and see those later, especially if you're a jury. They will deliberate on different things that are said and discussed, and so they have to record all those to make sure that they know what happened in the court. When the judge says strike that from the record, the court reporter is obligated to go back and delete whatever the judge tells them to delete, because that cannot be held as part of the decision-making process. So these are different people in court. Some of them are going to be kind of independent. Some of them are favoring the one side or the other, but they're all very important in this process. Today for and of course I almost forgot the last one. There he goes. The witness, person who is called in to testify in the case. This can be either for the defendant or the prosecutor or the plaintiff, but they're called in to testify because they have a role to play. They are required, they take an oath that they should not perjure themselves, they should not speak wrongly about what is being said, and that's important to help the case on either side. Okay, so here's your homework to practice the whole civil versus criminal. Sometimes, once again, they can be both as well. So I want you to do problem 1.7. You're going to, which be in the first chapter here, and I don't have, trying to remember where it is on the online book. Obviously, it's in the first chapter. I'm guessing it's like under the area called kinds of courts or some dealing with courts, and then flip through those pages to see if you can find it. You'll have to answer it on Canvas. So find at least 5 different wrongs that's happened to the boys or that the boys caused, and then determine whether that's civil, criminal, or both, and why you think that is. So you'll finish that up for homework, and then we'll talk about that tomorrow. So have a good rest of your day, and I hope to see you soon.